I think a big reason why other people didn't launch Lyft and Uber before was literally that. It's like it was basically illegal to do that, and they were worried that they would go to jail.
I mean, you're just going to run across people who say, like, it'll never work. But when markets are brand new and nascent, the thing that passes as obvious is clearly wrong.
I kind of feel like the vibe is shifting a little bit now, where when I'm talking to founders doing office hours, trying to help them find ideas, it's not as easy as, hey, like, go figure out like a vertical where there's like a workflow to automate like insurance or banking, because there's multiple startups in each of these verticals now. And there actually hasn't been like a model that's shaken things up for a while now. And so I think it's becoming more important to think about what's your actual like unique insight that is going to enable you to find a good idea, and what's like the contrarian bet you're going to make so that you can actually stand out from all of the competition.
So how do you actually discover a secret, if you will, something that you know and believe that nobody else believes yet?
Maybe we could do some case studies. Maybe like, why don't we talk about some of the companies we've seen that made a contrarian bet when they were coming up with their idea initially, and like maybe that will shake out some things people can learn from.
I think a helpful comparison to the previous technology shifts that we've had in the world, like if you look at the history of when we invented the internet, when we invented the smartphone, each time there's a roughly 2-year window where it was really easy. There's essentially like a modern day gold rush, right? Where like a whole new class of startup ideas like just opened up. Everybody rushed in, launched all the obvious ideas. And then, roughly 2 years after that, the obvious ideas begin to have been picked over, and you have to like look deeper for a secret.
I mean, I think it's deeper than merely like, is it obvious or non-obvious? Non-obvious sounds like in your body might feel like, neutral. But actually, non-obvious feels dangerous and scary. Like, I could devote my life to this, waste 10 years on this, and have no outcome. And, I guess the way that manifests, I think, is that there's just like ways of thinking that are out there that we pick up in media or in like sort of the conversations we have with the people around us that we don't examine. So, I was doing office hours recently with someone in the marketing space. And they came to me and said, you know what, like nobody has ever made a company large enough doing like just what we were doing. The weird thing was, we have AI now. Like this is sort of the perfect moment where no one's doing it. That means there's no competition. In fact, everyone else who has been in the space, prior to the AI revolution has failed. So there are just so many dead bodies stacked up around this idea. How do you know that you're not the right person to go and actually blow this wide open, especially because there is still this giant new capability? We have age of intelligence, the rocks can talk, they can think, and they can actually do the work of real human beings. You might be one of the only people who has the guts to go into that space and actually apply this. And his numbers are going up. The customers are sort of pulling it out of him already. Sometimes I'll talk to people about his startup and people say, oh, I need that tomorrow. So this is like the perfect example of, sometimes the market will be giving you indications of product market fit, but then you'll be using these mental models from, are people on X talking about it? Or is TechCrunch talking about it? Or, what will my friends say at a party? They'll say like, oh, you're working on a tar pit idea. So it sort of interacts with this idea that like competition is back and competition is bad. It's that like the obvious things, you're just going to pile up 10, 20, like, some of these spaces seem like they're like 5 or 6 or maybe a dozen or like 24 different startups, all of which have a real shot at it. And then now's sort of the moment to, again, focus on the secret again.
Yeah, Jared, to your point, the like new tech platforms create this like 2-year window. And so we were talking about this earlier, like with mobile, like iPhone launches, Android comes soon after it. In the immediate like year or two before that, like there are a lot of like sort of obvious ideas to go after, like photos. Instagram sort of grew out of that era. But like the actual big winners turned out to be companies like Uber, DoorDash, and Instacart.
Those were so non-obvious. Like folks who weren't around then don't remember how non-obvious that was. Like when the iPhone came out, there was like a million articles, a million like social media posts about like what kind of companies you could build with the iPhone. And like, I don't think a single person thought that like Uber would be the consequence.
I think the one in this context is really interesting to talk about actually might be DoorDash, because sort of essentially what we're saying is right now competition is back. There is more competition to find a good AI idea than ever. DoorDash entered a very crowded space. Like food delivery in general had been around for a while. Mobile was probably like a catalyst for even more food delivery apps. So by the time DoorDash launched, you already had Postmates, iterations of it. Actually, I was just talking to
Grubhub and Seamless were huge companies.
There's actually a YC company, Order Ahead, that Gary and I worked with, that was actually doing quite well at the time. Wasn't actually delivery. It was let you pick food up from the restaurant, which at the time actually
pick up.
It seemed like a bigger market maybe than food delivery at the time.
They were farther ahead. Like they had way more locations, for instance.
Yeah.
I mean, interestingly, like I think it happened even before that with it was Lyft before, and they were called Zimride before. And then, funny enough, YC had a company called RideJoy that was exactly a competitor against Zimride,
and they were like neck and neck.
Neck and neck, yeah. And Zimride decided to try to do peer-to-peer local rides. You know, Zimride and RideJoy were sort of both picking off people from Craigslist. And the idea there was like, oh, I'm driving to LA this weekend. You know, this platform would match you with other people and help you get, you know, a ride to Tahoe from SF or LA. And then suddenly Zimride realized, well, wait a second, like what if we actually did this at a much smaller scale, because we have everyone, you know, 70-80% of people out there started having smartphones. So instead of having this like long drawn out email back and forth to like meet at this time so we could get a ride and then, you know, I'll pay up for gas money, it became something that could be used every single day for short haul rides. And that was like sort of the first moment that people thought, well, maybe you could have a lot of people, more or less like a mobile workforce, entirely driven by the phone. And then I think that happened like sort of contemporaneously to Uber with their black cars. Yeah. But the funny thing was, and maybe this rhymes with often the office hours that we have to do all the time. It's like, I remember meeting with the RideJoy guys, and I was like, hey, this Zimride thing seems like it's working pretty well. We're seeing a lot of other companies that, you know, I think we had just met Apoorva Mehta at Instacart, and he was doing it for grocery delivery. Basically, the market was sort of pulling it out of all of these startups. And that was exactly the moment where, interestingly, I think those founders said, we're worried about the laws. It seems illegal, and we don't want to do anything illegal.
And they weren't wrong. I remember talking to the Lyft founders the week before they launched Lyft, and they were extremely worried that they would go to jail. And they decided to like roll the dice and launch this thing anyway. I think a big reason why other people didn't launch Lyft and Uber before was literally that. It's like it was basically illegal to do that, and they were worried that they would go to jail.
What's funny now is it does seem like the world will sort of change the laws, as it were, if it turns out that the end user, the end consumer wins by that much.
Totally. I mean, a lot of great startup ideas are sort of in this gray area of like the law is not totally clear. It's a little bit murky whether it's legal or illegal. Even OpenAI is like that, right? I mean, they crawled the entire web without permission. You could argue that that's fair use, or you could argue it's like massive copyright theft.
I guess all of these sort of buttress this idea that like non-obvious is not merely like, you know, purely intellectually, you know, not clear that this is going to work. It actually is a little bit more subtle than that. It's like, oh, I feel like that's might be a little dangerous. Like there might be something that, you know, I don't feel comfortable doing. And then really, really great founders sort of sense that as actually signal.
Coinbase was like this as well. Were the Coinbase folks like, I mean, that's always operated in a gray area of legality.
Coinbase to me feels a little bit less. I don't feel like crypto was well understood enough for it to be clearly illegal. Actually, they actually couldn't take that approach because they actually needed to get a banking partner in order to even be like have the service launched. Right.
I would say that Brian started off recognizing that a lot of the use cases, maybe way at the beginning part, you had cypherpunks, like people who were like radically into like libertarianism and this idea that you should not have centralized banking. But they took it to an extreme where they wanted totally anonymous identities. I mean, it was more, you know, Bitcoin really very early on was a lot more Silk Road than what it is today. So I actually think that Brian Armstrong early was like the exact opposite of, Yeah, I mean, he was contrarian in another way. Like if you hung out with a lot of people who were really, really into Bitcoin in 2010, 2011, 2012, the majority of people you ran across were cypherpunks who said, F the state, F the laws, and we're going to have sort of this radical freedom through Bitcoin.
And there's Brian Armstrong like doing deals with banking companies
Right.
and working with the regulators.
Yeah, that's what his contrarian bet was. It was that it's worth doing all of this like extra work for a time where it wasn't clear the market even wanted it. Like it was very clear the cyberpunks and like Silk Road all wanted like crypto and anonymous payments. It wasn't clear that regular people would. And so why it didn't seem like a valuable thing at the time to go and talk to a bank and do a partnership and go through all the like KYC and AML laws, because like you'd only do that if you thought that regular people would want to trade crypto at some point.
And those things actually make your product worse, right? Yeah. Like forcing people to go through KYC like greatly increases the friction.
And beyond that, they're the exact opposite of what the current market wants. Like the current market could not have been more enraged about like Brian and Coinbase's approach to crypto at the time.
Yeah, I mean, you're just going to run across people who say like it'll never work, but when markets are brand new and nascent, like often when you're that early, the thing that passes as obvious is clearly wrong, actually. So that might have been like a very profound version of that. Before anyone cancels us for saying that founders might get something out of doing illegal things, like I actually don't think that people should by default go out and try to do illegal things. Like I think the through line is not that you should do illegal things, or it's that you should think about from first principles, what are the things that markets and people need.
Totally.
And then I think basically in the case of, UberX and Lyft, it became very clear within like sort of the first few months of that coming out, especially in San Francisco, where literally we have some of the worst taxi cab like sort of infrastructure and really difficult transit. I mean, basically like that came out of necessity. And then the quality of life inside San Francisco went from here to here the second that you could actually just freely move around very easily without the uncertainty of like call a taxi cab and they would just literally not show up.
Not show up like half the time. I know.
And then it's like, how do you actually like live in a city and get around? Like, that I think that, these services literally made San Francisco 10x more livable in a lot of ways. So, I think it's like, don't just run out and do illegal things. Like that's actually clearly net bad.
No,
like,
of course.
It's more, what are things that users want? And then thinking from first principles also does actually involve thinking about, well, what are the downsides, right? And how do we mitigate those things?
We don't play that. We don't play that. We don't play that. G-Unit. We don't play around.